This is the Wisdom Tree NES Collection, or as the cartridge would imply, the Wisdom Tree Video Game Collection. This was a forwardly limited edition cart only available through the Wisdom Tree Kickstarter for their arcade. The arcade being a TV plug-and-play game with the entirety of Wisdom Tree's NES library on it. Chances are, though, there's at least a handful of you who don't even know who Wisdom Tree is. To summarize, Wisdom Tree is the final evolution of Color Dreams. Color Dreams being a fairly unremarkable unlicensed developer of the 8 and 16-bit era. Some of their titles include the previously reviewed Raid 2020 and the US release of Colorful Dragon, a horrible Sachin-developed game I briefly played a few episodes back. The only true distinguishing characteristic between Color Dreams and Wisdom Tree is that Wisdom Tree plays to a very specific crowd, as all of their games are in some way based on the Judeo-Christian mythology. This is pretty relevant as Nintendo of America was notoriously strict and adverse to the inclusion of religious imagery and themes in their licensed products at the time. Much in the same way a vacuum formed in China and Russia, leading to all manner of shenanigans as we've discussed previously, so was the case with so-called Bible games in the US. That aside, I do think there are some notable differences in how we should approach these games as opposed to bootlegs, but we'll get to that later. But before we jump into that, I just want to give Wisdom Tree, or perhaps their parent company Pico Interactive, who bought Wisdom Tree out in 2013, some huge props, because the package they put together, at least for the limited Kickstarter run of this game, is very cool. I mean, wow. For starters, you get this wonderful individually numbered box featuring gorgeous redrawn artwork representing all 7 games included on the cart. A full-color manual, which is actually a rarity for all of gaming at this point. The Bible Buffet quiz book, which is a strange but essential element for a particular game. And lastly, a full-color double-sided poster. On one side, once again showing the great box art, and on the other side, reimagined artwork for Wisdom Tree's only Super Nintendo game, the strange Wolfenstein 3D clone, Super Noah's Ark 3D. There's literally only one thing about this package that I just don't like, and it's kind of minute, and that's the back of the box. Notice anything odd? As I mentioned, the cart has all 7 NES Wisdom Tree titles, but for some reason they decided to list one of the games that is itself part of Bible Adventures as its own separate entry. You see, the Wisdom Tree NES collection, in many ways, is a multi-cart of multi-carts. In particular, the titles Sunday Funday, King of Kings, and the aforementioned Bible Adventures are each comprised of 3 more or less distinct games, bringing the game count technically to 15 or 14 depending on your interpretation. And lastly, it must be said that the striking red color of the cartridge is really appealing. I would have rather seen them make cartridges based on their old Wisdom Tree carts, which had sort of a distinct look to them, but this still sticks out. How about we actually take a look at some of these games, shall we? Okay, well actually first I need to talk about this menu. It's really bad. The cursor is very touchy, and it's easy to overshoot the selection you're trying to make. Also, the design here isn't much better than some of the Chinese bootlegs I've seen in the past. This might seem a little nitpicky, but I would have liked more from this. Okay, so Sunday Funday is 3 or maybe 2 games. The first of which is simply known as Sunday Funday, a bizarre side-scrolling action game where our hero must make it to Sunday school on time, along the way murdering or converting people in the name of God. A jolly good time for sure. If this premise at all seems weird to you, it's probably because Sunday Funday is a pretty lazy graphics hack of one of Color Dream's earlier projects, Menace Beach, a game noteworthy for little more than having some pretty shockingly sexual content for an NES game. Sunday Funday is simply that game with a coat of self-righteous paint. Everything that made that game lackluster, such as its strange controls and somewhat unfair difficulty, are retained entirely. That being said, this game is nowhere as bad as some others have made it out to be in the past, and is one of the most playable on this cartridge. Plus, the very little work put into this hack means that the ultra-violent, body-bursting explosions from the original are also maintained. The last thing to note about Sunday Funday is that there's actually a third version of this game. Along with Menace Beach, there is also Miss Peach World 1 Super LA Cop. What a name. A graphics hack for Japanese markets by Hacker International, which amps up the original game's sexual themes many times over, and which uses Nintendo's classic princess on its box art. Fishfall is our second stop on this roller coaster ride of life, and is one of the strangest inclusions on any of these Wisdom Tree carts. Apparently this was an abandoned Color Dreams prototype that had some Bible verses haphazardly slapped onto it and stuck onto this cartridge. The gameplay is extremely rudimentary, where you catch fish with your cosmic space hand and throw them up at a basket until a quota for the level is met, and then you move on. It controls well enough, but the gameplay is excessively unfun. This is one of those games that ends up being merely a task. You can never establish any sort of rhythm to throwing the fish, there's very little variety, and the levels go on forever. Lastly, we have The Ride. This is a chiptune karaoke version of the Christian rock group For Him's famous hit, Ride of Life. It's probably the best music wisdom tree ever committed to a cartridge, but that's not saying all that much. Next game! Here we go, we're just moving right along. Spiritual Warfare. This is hands down the best game in this collection, and the first game built from the ground up completely. Taking heavy influence from Zelda, this is a top-down adventure game, where you fight enemies, non-believers, with fruit in search of the armor of God, which the big man upstairs decided to scatter around the park and city for whatever reason. It plays mostly great, in places even improving upon Zelda, such as the addition of diagonal movement, but some of the weird graphical bugs that appear between rooms can be sort of distracting. And the dungeon layouts are by no means on the level of Miyamoto. In general, the visuals are serviceable, especially in the park area, and the music is meh. But more importantly, here's a game that you could actually get lost in playing if you wanted to. That is, as long as you don't mind long passwords. Probably one of the highest compliments I can give Spiritual Warfare is that its concept and grounding in Christianity, whether you're a fan of that religion or not, is much better handled here than elsewhere in the Wisdom Tree catalog. It doesn't feel purposelessly tacked onto a pre-existing game, but rather integrated and built into the world. There are these annoying quiz sections which detract from this a bit, but it's mostly forgivable. These quizzes are something we'll see again. Okay, let's talk about Exodus and Joshua. These are for all intents and purposes the same game. Slightly different levels, though none are really distinguishable, and different graphics, but aside from that, the same game. Furthermore, these games are based on another Color Dreams release, Crystal Mines. The gameplay here is the epitome of a generic arcade fare, involving collecting X amount of an object and then heading for the goal, all while defeating enemies and collecting upgrades to your attack. It controls nice enough and isn't too boring, at least in one of the cases. I know that one of the games was subject to constant graphical glitches in the HUD, which actually detracted quite a bit because you never knew how many more you had to get for a quota, and so on. Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you which one though, since they both run together so effortlessly. Again, you have these quiz questions that show up periodically, just there to make sure that you aren't having too much fun. It's a cheap gimmick to increase the perceived religiosity of these games. Bible Adventures. Everybody who has heard of Wisdom Tree has likely heard of this one. It's often said that the games on this cart were heavily inspired by Super Mario Bros. 2/USA. There are some surface similarities such as similar desert environments, and more obviously the fact that all these games involve lifting things over your head, but that's where the similarities stop. For starters, there's Noah's Ark, a game that does the absolute bare minimum required of a game about Noah's Ark. The story, as it goes, is that God's going to kill all the animals and people, and arbitrarily wants Noah to do the work of getting certain amounts of them together on his boat. The problem with going off of that concept alone is baked into the idea itself. Supplying a checklist of goals doesn't automatically make for a game. You just have a chore at that point. Each animal that you want to get on the ark has its own quirks, but never once do they go beyond frustrating hindrances, such as the oxen that are dropped whenever you jump. I think this game could have been a lot better if maybe some of the animals helped you, for example, lent you their powers, skills, or something. Instead, each one seems dead set in doing whatever it can to ensure that they drowned. Baby Moses is nearly fun, though its broader problems are nearly the same as that of Noah's Ark. For starters, essentially the whole thing is an escort mission where you try to get to the end of the level while holding Baby Moses, who is thrown with the same button you use to run and pick up things. The odd thing is that it's not clear why you would ever want to throw Baby Moses in the first place, since he's required to finish every stage. So it really just complicates things. The controls are also abhorrently bad, much worse than most of the bootlegs I've played, where in those the problem often stems from jumps not feeling like they do in the official counterparts. Here, every jump feels totally different and imprecise. All of this goes for Noah's Ark as well, but it's more important in this side-scrolling action game. Reworked slightly, this one could be fun though, as a generic Mario 2 inspired side-scroller. David and Goliath is arguably the best game in Bible Adventures, feeling like a mix between Baby Moses and Noah's Ark, but also more refined than either two. Your goal for the most part is to get 4 sheep to the end of the stage while avoiding lions and honey badgers. The levels are designed well enough, and it never gets too frustrating or repetitive like the other two. It also comes across as the only game where gameplay came first, which is good. The final level of D&G switches things up a bit, giving you a sling and some enemies to fight. This is the most frustrating and time-consuming level thanks to its reliance on vertical platforming not suited to the controls. But it does make for a nice change of pace, overall. Out of the 3 Bible adventures, I recommend this one the highest. Alright, King of Kings, another 3-part multi-cart. Alright, first of all 3 of the games, Wise Men, Jesus in the Temple, and Flight to Egypt, have the most depressingly drab graphics you could hope for from an NES game. A lot of Wisdom Tree games do for that matter. Browns, grays, and dark greens populate most of the screens in these games. All 3 titles are standard side-scrollers, which I appreciate, but man, I don't know. The Wise Man is probably the only one that could really be enjoyable for any length of time, being a pretty standard platformer with the occasional extremely frustrating element. Flight to Egypt is another standard platform game but lacks any variety in the level design, making some stages feel almost indistinguishable. It also seems pretty easy, which I guess is sort of a good thing, given the rest of the games anyway. And then you have Jesus in the Temple. Okay, this game, at the very least you could call the other 2 games. I'm not so sure here. My major issue with this game, aside from its awful play control and drab visuals and just general blah presentation, is that the win condition isn't always present, exemplified in the second level by these glitchy falling logs. Oftentimes the final log just will not show up and you have no choice but to die and try again. I don't think it's too surprising that random chance does not often make for a fun side-scrolling game of this kind. And lastly we have Bible Buffet. What in the world? I mean, this is a really strange idea, but I guess it kind of works. I mean, not as a Bible game, but as a weird version of Candyland with Zelda-style action sequences? Sure. Bible Buffet is a 1 to 4 player game in which you traverse a Candyland-inspired board full of mini action sequences that play almost identically to Spiritual Warfare. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this was the same engine. And then every once in a while you need to answer some Bible questions which they didn't bother programming into the game, so you have to look them up in the included quiz book. It has some interesting things going on, like real human speech,
Player 1,
and quite a bit of level variety. And like I said, it's incredibly weird to the point of being charming. That being said, this really is a Bible game in name only. I think the title may truly be the only reference to it in-game. For example, you could rewrite the quiz book and easily have like a Nintendo-themed trivia game. Also, some of the maps, while generally pretty fun, do at times feel kind of cheap. And it really drags hard, especially when you land on a backtrack space, which just should not even exist in my opinion. Overall, this is still one of the better games on here, and worth a look. Okay, to wrap things up, allow me to address something important to my reputation. There are a lot of analogies to be drawn between the development and necessity of these games and that of bootlegs. But, as you might have noticed, I went a quite deal harder on these games. So what's the deal? Am I just a religion basher or something? Here's the way I look at it. First of all, from just a pure gameplay standpoint, especially when we discuss the platform games, the bootlegs I've talked about on here are oftentimes just legitimately better than Wisdom Tree's offerings. And secondly, there's a big difference in motivation. On part of bootleggers, you essentially have 2 groups. Those whose single goal is to steal and resell as many games as possible, perhaps with Mario's face plastered over it, and those who are trying to emulate or entirely port another game to weaker hardware. Wisdom Tree was unable to achieve goals analogous to either of these groups, or even what should be their own true goal, which is just creating good games. What I mean to say is, Wisdom Tree didn't take the easy but highly efficient route of rebranding their entire former catalog as Bible games, instead just a few for no particular reason, nor to large wealth of derivative but quality originals with the Bible gimmick. Spiritual Warfare is the only real example. Instead, they opted to develop a bunch of original titles with either totally uninspired gameplay or no connection to the selling point. This is the definition of best of no worlds. Tengen and Chimerica handled unlicensed development worlds better. This in mind though, believe it or not, I love the Wisdom Tree NES collection. Not for the games honestly, though. Like I said, there's a few decent ones on here. One more huge shout out to Spiritual Warfare. The real great thing about this cart is the relative cheapness in comparison to buying all of these games separately, which is great for collectors like me. the convenience, and the extra goodies that came with it. I also can't help but have a slight fondness for the development process that's behind these games, but that's for another time, I think. So, there you have it. This is the Wisdom Tree NES collection. Thanks for watching. I really came across a lot angrier in this video than I ever intended to. This doesn't really rage me or anything like that. In fact, I think it's a pretty good product for everything that you get. I think Funday by itself is like 150 bucks. So, to get this cartridge with all their NES games for less than half of that is a pretty great deal. That being said, I do hope to bring a lot more positivity to next time's video. That being said, thank you all so much for watching. I always appreciate your comments. I've been getting a lot of good comments recently. Great community here. I just appreciate everything you guys have to say, and it's helping me see other perspectives too, which is always fun. Also, if you haven't yet, if you could subscribe, that'd be nice. Leave a like. I am trying to do more with this YouTube thing, trying to actually build it into something. I don't know how realistic that is, but that's sort of my goal. Also, you might want to stick around for next time, because next time I'm going to be talking about something that I don't think will slightly rage me so much, and that's something I'm extremely excited to talk about. That is Zelda D-Makes on Famicom. We got Link to the Past, and we got Link's Awakening. Very excited to talk about these guys. See you next time.